Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker, Marla rose to the stage. Marla is an award-nominated journalist, columnist, and author, as well as the co-founder of Chicago Vegan Mania, the largest free vegan festival of its kind in the Midwest, now in its 10th year. Besides writing most of the content and managing social media for Vegan Street, she also is an integral part of building Chicago's vegan community. For the last several years, she's been publishing feature stories in magazines, acted as the programming director for Chicago Vegan Mania, and has spoken about effective communications at the Animal Rights Conference and Vegetarian Summerfest, as well as many other conferences and festivals. She also recently wrote the cookbook and guidebook, Fun, Festive, and Fabulous, Vegan Holidays for Everyone. Please welcome Marla to the stage.
Thank you so much. I assume you can hear me, right? Okay, cool. You can hear me? Yeah, good. I want to really thank Madison Vegan Fest for having me out here, and I'm just like blown away that they've been able to continue the festival when the earlier one stopped, and they just picked up the torch and kept running. So I really am impressed with that, and so glad to be here. And also very impressed that you memorized that, because I have not memorized this. But anyway, my brain is not what it used to be, but maybe it never was. So anyway, welcome everyone. It's great to be in one of my favorite cities and helping to kick off. This is the first Madison Vegan Fest, right? And I can't imagine there are any feminists in the audience of this college town, right? I know college towns don't usually have feminists in it, right? Or at a vegan fest, there's probably no vegans here, right? No. Okay, cool. All right. We can trash those people. No, I'm kidding. I'm really glad to be here and always happy for a chance to visit Madison. I want to just briefly say we live in Chicago, as was mentioned a million times in my introduction, and I've got to work on that introduction thing. But Chicago Vegan Mania is October 13th. It's a big free festival like this. We've got like 24 food vendors and about 100 booths, live music all day. And like I said, this is our 10th year, so it's going to be amazing. And so glad that you guys could be here and show up for Chicago Vegan Mania, too. It's going to be phenomenal. So I know you're supposed to play it a little bit more cool than this, but I'm going to out myself, because this is like my dream speaking kind of gig, because, you know, why a feminist ethic supports a vegan practice. This was kind of me when I was a kid. When I grow up, I'm going to smash the patriarchy and save the animals. Actually, that's kind of how I reimagine myself. Even though today I'm a feminist vegan, it was kind of a circuitous path getting here, which isn't surprising. Like most of the rest of my free-to-be you and me generation, I was taught some confusing messages about being a girl and a woman growing up. That girls could be anything boys could be, but also some pretty entrenched and contradictory messages, like that girls who are confident are pushy and stuck up, and girls who achieve too much will grow up to be lonely and have too many cats. Like everyone else, I was also taught some confusing double messages as a human animal, to be kind to other animals, but also that they're here to serve us. We send these mixed messages to everyone, and it takes a long time, maybe a lifetime, to untangle them. So feminism is a concept that historically has been about as well received as veganism. So I thought, what the heck, why not combine the two into one nifty talk? Feminism has a bunch of different interpretations and definitions, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to defer to Merriam-Webster's definition, which defines veganism as the theory of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes, or organized activity on behalf of women's rights and interests. Let's go with that. So to understand feminism, we need to dig a little deeper to understand why there's a need for it. Well, just as we don't live in a colorblind world, we also don't live in a gender-neutral world. So this leads me to an inevitability that we're going to have to face together. I'm going to briefly talk about a subject that will make some eyes perhaps roll, and maybe people want to take out their phones and record me, send to Breitbart. But I think I'm probably pretty safe in this crowd. I'm not sure. But in order to talk about feminism and veganism, we need to address the boogeyman in the room. So yes, we are going to briefly talk about the patriarchy. So don't panic, I promise, it'll be quick. So while we have made many strides in the United States, it wasn't that long ago this country was a patriarchy in the true sense of the word, which is defined also by Merriam-Webster as a social organization marked by the supremacy of the father in the clan or family, the legal dependence of wives and children, and the reckoning of descent and inheritance in the male line, or more broadly, control by men of a disproportionately large share of power or society or institution organized according to the principles or practices of patriarchy. Okay, so take a deep breath, relax. It doesn't mean that I'm saying that all men are evil, or that all women are benevolent angels, or any of the other kind of simplistic and defensive conclusions people often jump to when they hear a term like patriarchy or a word like feminism. We have to be honest about the factors of our culture, though, in order to have this conversation and in order to evolve. Like, for example, here's an ad from 1951, kind of the heyday of sexism in advertising in our country, right? And you might be thinking, well, this is from a long time ago. And you'd be right, 1951 was a long time ago. But this ad is from 2012 for Belvedere vodka. So while we have made major advances at addressing and reducing the primacy and effect of patriarchy in the United States, we can see both the fingerprints and signposts of it on a lot of aspects of life today. This isn't surprising because until the middle of the 19th century, women's legal rights and obligations were absorbed by the husband upon marriage in the United States. Today, in the US, at least, in other words, the wife in a marriage was considered property under something called coverture to her husband without her own legal existence. And so today, in the United States at least, the influence of patriarchy is usually more subtle, though sometimes not if we remove our blinders. But also it's still very pervasive, quite pervasive. No, men don't own their wives and children anymore, but women still make 79 cents to the dollar of every man, and the pay disparity is far wider for Black and Latina women. Assuming the current pace of change, women will have to wait another 100 years until 2119 to reach pay parity, according to the American Association of University Women. Females occupy less than 15% of upper management positions. Women hold about 20% of seats in Congress, which might help to explain why we are still debating reproductive choice and losing choice as more conservative states close clinics and access is obstructed. More evidence that it's not just examples from long ago that confirm existence of a patriarchy. It wasn't until 1993 that marital rape became a crime in all 50 states. 1993. Even so, many states still have exceptions that up the violence requirement and consider it a lesser crime than non-marital rape. Is this a holdover from when we considered women to be the legal property of their partners? So patriarchy, as far as I'm concerned, exists. Is it as bad as it was in 1818 or 1918? No, but that doesn't erase its existence, nor does it mean that we don't have a long way to go. We need to not be in denial about that. What's even more obvious, but also so entrenched and so normalized that it's hidden in plain sight, is the position of forced servitude and objectification of animals in all cultures and spheres of society. But how do feminism and veganism tie together? Is there a common root? If so, how do we uproot it? It's difficult to ignore how animal agribusiness models, replicates, and reinforces the worst of patriarchal norms, unless we think of other animals as much lesser beings who are unworthy of equal moral consideration. If we do that, consider them much lesser beings, then what we do to them is usually justifiable one way or another, because the underlying conceit is that what we want is what matters. They are here to serve us. This is because under capitalism, a construct of patriarchy, other animals are only worth the sum of their parts. They're deeply devalued parts. One school of thought is that agrarianism was what gave rise to capitalism. We see the fingerprints of capitalism in the word livestock, literally meaning living stock. Stock meaning supply for future use, or sum of money, or movable property of a farm. We also hear that familiar echo in the word spent, from the Old English spenden, meaning to pay out or away, which is also how we describe dairy cows and egg-laying hens who are no longer as productive as they once were, reaffirming how the living stock of animal agribusiness are valued with a term that we still use today to describe an animal whose biological resources and thus value are determined and then depleted. Just as people of color have been oppressed in countless ways by white supremacy, and female identifying people are harmed by gender bias and discrimination, other animals suffer and suffer deeply due to their lowly status of being considered property. Veganism is on the rise, but while this has meant things have improved for human herbivores, hey, it means we get to eat out more often, and we can argue for hours on end about the ethics of various veggie burger companies on Facebook. The animals are still slaughtered in numbers so vast it cannot avoid becoming an abstraction. So over 56 billion land animals are killed worldwide for food each year. When we're considering aquatic animals, that's in the trillions. So while animals are brutalized in many spheres of society, from animals used in laboratories to those used in entertainment, I'm going to be focusing on those used in agribusiness for this talk. It is thought that the first animals domesticated for food were goats and sheep around 11,000 to 9,000 BCE. Over the years, but especially in the modern era, as animals' bodies have become more engineered through human intervention and genetic manipulation, we have turned them into virtual meat, eggs, and milk machines, basically production units producing units of production. Even animals on smaller farms and organic farms are only valued at what they are worth to those who own them. When they stop earning their meager keep, they are killed. Remember, they are property. Ownership and the idea of being valued according to different metrics of worth derives from capitalism, which flows from patriarchy. I believe that a feminist ethic would be one that rejects the premise and practice of valuing one another on an outdated appraisal system, actually determining worth based on any estimation system. Because we are so immersed in this certain way of perceiving the world and assigning virtue and value, it can be really hard to imagine a reality without it. As Marshall McLuhan wrote, if a fish could speak, water is the last thing it would identify as part of its environment. We are so deeply swimming in patriarchy and speciesism, we scarcely notice it because that is our normal. So what can we do? We can take a step back and ask ourselves, if we believe that oppressing others due to gender or any other arbitrary circumstances is unacceptable, how could we be okay with communicating to other animals that we own their bodies and their biological processes? How can we say that we're feminists and condone manipulating, mutilating, and keeping individuals to their enormous suffering so our passing desires can be appeased? As feminists, we believe that, among other things, no one should be punished or exploited because of their gender or reproductive organs and capacity. A quick side note here. Reproductive organs and capacity are not the final word on who is and who is not female. Many female identifying individuals do not have uteruses, and many born with the capacity to bear children do not identify as female. For the purposes of this talk, though, I will be addressing how the reproductive system of female-born animals is uniquely exploited and brutalized by animal agribusiness, but it should go without saying that the industry brutalizes all. So let's just consider two kinds of animals in food production. Let's look at dairy cows and egg-laying hens. I want to start with dairy cows. Despite the images many of us hold of cows idly grazing on grass, grazing is not an efficient use of time or land when you're trying to produce a quick, high milk yield. So cows, natural ruminants with stomachs designed to digest grasses and other tough vegetation, are often fed grains, which can cause a chronic acidic condition that can lead to liver abscesses and lameness. Selective breeding for high production and fertility has created cows who will be raised indoors on grain-based diets, despite not being anatomically designed for it. Indoors is used euphemistically here. More than 90% of US dairy cows are confined inside, many living on concrete floors in less than hospitable environments. These concrete floors, along with the stress of confinement and extreme temperatures, metabolic and digestive disorders, poorly maintained bedding in stalls, a grain-based diet, too little movement, and too much body weight, contribute to the painful condition of lameness, which is found in 1 out of every 3 dairy cows in the US. Also in the US, the average cow produces more than 7 gallons of milk per day. The average milk production, and milk production has experienced a 93% growth in the past 40 years, 93% growth in the past 40 years, expanding from 115 billion pounds in 1975 to 115 billion pounds in 1975 to 212 billion pounds of dairy in 2016, even as liquid milk consumption is dwindling. This expansion is thanks in large part to a powerful dairy lobby, taxpayer buyouts, and USDA subsidization that amounted to 73% of the dairy market's value in 2015. These cows are made to produce more through selective breeding, though, and combined with the common practice of putting antibiotics in feed, discovered in the 1940s to accelerate growth, we now have more milk than the government can give away, literally, try as they might. The ramped up production of milk and rapid succession of birthing cycles, after a 9-month gestation period, cows are forcibly impregnated again, approximately 3 months after giving their birth to their previous calf, which can also lead to the painful condition of mastitis. Basically, it's a mammary gland infection found in 1/3 of all dairy cows. Mastitis is the most common disease found in dairy cows and is caused by physical trauma, perhaps by mechanical milking machines, or infection, resulting in udders that are inflamed and sometimes grotesquely swollen. Other systemic cruelties that are inflicted upon their sensitive bodies include mutilations without painkillers and follow-up care, like air tagging, dehorning, and cutting through sensitive skin, nerves, and bones to ducktails. It should go without saying, but dairy cows must be pregnant in order to produce milk, like all mammals. I'm not here to teach sex ed, but a cow's udders do not spontaneously produce milk without pregnancy hormones any more than a human female would produce breast milk without being pregnant or nursing. Pregnancy of a dairy cow is almost always executed through artificial insemination today, as it's far more convenient and controllable. Dairy cows are forcibly impregnated using a restraining apparatus as a farm worker inserts an inseminator syringe full of bull semen through a cow's rectum, vagina, and cervical rings to reach the cervix for depositing. The cruelest punishment, though, for the misfortune of having been born a female dairy cow is the repeated pregnancy, birth, and lactation cycles the mother must endure each year, only to have her calf taken from her, usually within hours and sometimes still wet from birth, just as the mother experienced herself as a newborn. The calf is allowed colostrum, which is the first milk and is not designated for human consumption. This is an economic consideration because colostrum helps the baby calf develop immunity and not be a loss to those who own him or her. The dairy after colostrum is designated for human consumption: milk, cheese, yogurt, whey, butter, and so on. Cows and calves alike have been observed crying out for each other, desperate to be reunited. Their cries are futile, though. Calves are put on a formula replacement. The male calves of dairy cows will either go into veal production, beef production, or for a small percentage, breeding. Some cows consider the male calves to be so worthless, literally worthless, that they are crudely killed shortly after birth. Their skin may be turned into leather. That's where we get calf skin. Female calves will be put into dairy production like their mothers and endure the same cycles of forced pregnancy, birth, lactation, and loss until they are considered a financial liability due to reduced milk yield. Productivity decreases between 4 and 5 years of age. So dairy cows though dairy cows can live up to 20 years. It is when they produce less milk that they are directed to the meat industry, where they will be turned into cheap beef like that used in hamburger or pet food. Yes, it is the same for organic, grass-fed, and kosher dairy cows. The end of the road is meat. Because dairy cows are basically milk production units, while circumstances of their lives may vary, they are still property. And when they are no longer prolific milk producers, they will become a financial burden. And of course, dairy cows, despite what the slick marketing campaigns leave out of the picture, are kept in cycles of pregnancy and cruelly denied mother-calf connection no matter their environments. So I have a quick question. Does this sound like a feminist practice? Does this sound like a way that feminists, those who consider females to be equal, would treat other living, sensitive beings? Does that sound feminist to you? Now let's talk about egg-laying hens and their chicks. It is worth noting that while eggs and chickens are so deeply woven into the fabric of our language and culture, and the image of the mother hen with her chicks is so reassuring and quaint, the actual birds in egg production are treated with absolute disregard and cruelty. Egg-laying hens, referred to by the industry as layers, are among the most severely abused of those who provide for the human appetite, and this is saying something, given how ground level that bar already is. Despite the pastoral narrative many believe, these birds get their start as chicks in a hatchery. They are not hatched in a nest under their mother's soft protective feathers. They are born in decidedly less hospitable incubators. This is true of industrially raised layers as well as those who will eventually produce the eggs for backyard egg enthusiasts and the free-range and organic industries. They all originate in these incubators. It is estimated that 95% of the 300 million hens in egg production in the US at any given time will live their lives in crowded, cramped battery cages in large, dark warehouses, where their sensitive feet become sore, cracked, and deformed from standing on the wire cage floor night and day. The hen's claws may become long and thin and twisted without a proper scratching surface, and can even curl around the wire floor, entrapping and starving the bird and making her unable to defend herself from other agitated birds in her cage or even eat. The vast majority of hens raised for egg production are kept in these battery cages with 5 to 10 other birds, so cramped they are unable to stretch their wings or sometimes even turn around. They are also denied their natural instincts for sunbathing, nesting, preening, perching, scratching, foraging, dust bathing, roosting, stretching, and exploring, which results in stressed neighbors who have been driven to aggressive behaviors. They will live in cages with their own waste. And if in a lower cage, the additional waste of those in higher level cages, the overwhelming smell of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide irritating their eyes and making them susceptible to bacterial respiratory infections. These egg production facilities can range in size from 100,000 birds to more than 1 million hens, with these birds inclined to abide by complex social structures by nature, producing about 75 billion eggs in the US each year. Left to her own, a wild hen will lay between 10 to 15 eggs per year, as egg production is very energy intensive and a depleting process. In stark contrast, a hen raised as a layer has been genetically manipulated to endure laying 250 to 300 eggs per year. Even with genetic manipulation, this accelerated egg production is disastrous for their tiny bodies, commonly causing osteoporosis and bone fractures, skeletal paralysis, and severe reproductive disorders, including tumors, egg binding, which happens when large eggs get stuck, and the slow, agonizing torture of uterine prolapse, which happens when the uterus pushes out of the hen's body. Layer hens have essentially become egg factories, engineered to mass produce large eggs against their own body's best interests. Hens are further cruelly manipulated through the common industry practice of forced molting, in which food and sometimes water is withheld for anywhere from a week to up to 14 days or longer in order to shock a hen's laying cycle into producing more eggs and thus profitability. This period of forced starvation, during which time a hen often loses between 25 to 35% of her starting weight, may occur 2 to 3 times during a hen's short life. Just as the dairy industry has the unwanted but unavoidable consequence of male calves as a biological necessity, so does the egg industry have an end product that is worthless to them. With no place for male chicks in egg production, it is estimated that more than 260 million chicks in the US are killed as soon as they have had their sexes determined by industry workers shortly after hatching. In the US, the unwanted male chicks can be killed in any crude and cheap method available because they, like all birds, are not protected by even the very, very low provisions of the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. Suffocation, maceration, and high-speed grinders, asphyxiation, and even stomping are all acceptable slaughter methods for these newborn chicks, peeping for their mothers, but deaf to an industry. The stress of egg production and crowded living conditions aren't the only cruelties inflicted upon a hen's sensitive and delicate body. Debeaking is a standard industry-wide practice done to reduce the aggression and cannibalism common among birds stressed by confinement and denied her natural habits. Known euphemistically as beak trimming by the industry, debeaking amputates 1/2 to 2/3 off the top beak and 1/4 to 1/3 off the bottom beak, using a hot blade to cut and cauterize without anesthesia or follow-up care. As with all birds, The beak of the chicken is a complex sensory organ with numerous nerve endings, much like a human fingertip. And at the end of the beak is a specialized cluster of highly sensitive receptors. This permanent trauma to the beak is intensely painful, and debeaked chickens can struggle to eat or drink. It is standard industry practice to debeak chicks at 1 day old. Many people feel they can avoid supporting the common cruelties inflicted on chickens by buying humane eggs, but debeaking is allowed under many so-called humane labels, and regardless, even eggs from backyard hens originated at a hatchery that slaughters newborn baby chicks as a standard practice at birth. Inside cage-free facilities, one can find birds that are intensely confined without cages, but still with scant little room. The legal requirement of the free-range label only has to mean that thousands of hens crammed into a facility might have an open door somewhere in the warehouse, and an unspecified amount of time to outdoor access few will ever experience. Organic mainly means what they were fed before, while they were being kept as egg layers. After about 18 months of having her body used as an egg production machine to those who own her, a hen is usually considered spent. Her body, fragile, depleted, and aching, is no longer producing a high volume of eggs. While an egg-laying hen may have a natural lifespan of 5 to 10 years or longer, she will be killed before the age of 2. Again, like all birds, she is exempted from even the pitiful standards of the Humane Slaughter Act. I urge you to not be deceived by the wholesome packaging or slick humane washing marketing campaigns. When living beings are turned into production units, the bottom line is their profitability to both large and small operations. As with organic grass-fed cows used in the dairy industry, the end of the road for even chickens on quaint little egg farms is slaughter. I can't understand how any of this would be acceptable from a feminist perspective. I can tell you that I'm saying all this not to depress you, not to shame anyone, but to express how deeply anti-feminist the industries and the industry's practices are. This is simply reality. As depressing as this is, I share this so that we can move ahead consciously, leaning toward justice, compassion, and evolution. And because I don't want to end on a depressing note, I will say that there's lots of reasons to have hope, including this festival, including all the awesome people here, and around the world who have decided that they can't stomach, literally, the status quo anymore. With that, here are 10 ideas I had on what we as vegans and feminists can do to end our support of oppression and connect the dots in effective and meaningful ways. Number 1, we can be voices of anti-oppression. Many people don't realize how deeply interconnected forms of oppression are. Use your voice and your platforms to be a voice and a role model of veganism and feminism, but also anti-oppression in general. The more we disrupt patriarchy and its corollaries, the closer we will get to a better world. Remember that we are all raised in this normalized status quo, and it takes some introspection and self-honesty for everyone to be able to root it out of ourselves. Number 2, we can consume media, and we can consume and support media created by those who are outside of our experience. Podcasts, articles, books, videos from people of different races, life experiences, and other communities can help us to expand our worldview and our empathy. If we're already vegan and we want to reach people with a vegan message, we need to be more understanding of the challenges of their communities, and we need to be better listeners and not behave like condescending saviors. The impulse toward confirmation bias is deeply ingrained, and when we expand our worldview, that helps to neutralize it a bit. Number 3, we could stop using gendered and animalized insults. Calling females bitch and worse, calling those we don't like cows, pigs, chickens, and so on, reinforces negative attitudes about other animals. Language is powerful. Don't dismiss it. Speaking of, please begin the practice of referring to other animals as he and she rather than it. Number 4, we can direct more financial support to local organizations and smaller nonprofits that are doing great work instead of the national ones that are already so well funded. You will also have more of a voice with smaller organizations, which tend to be less bloated and more resourceful. In addition to local organizations, some smaller national groups worthy of your support are groups led by women of color, such as the Food Empowerment Project, Better Eating International, and Encompass. They all have a vegan message and are pro-intersectional. And also, of course, supporting animal sanctuaries, more than I could name. Number 5, we can use our platforms for extending the reach of those with fewer advantages, like people of color and those who are disabled. How can you use your advantages to help amplify the voices of those with fewer? Number 6, we can be allies, but don't expect cookies. Don't expect people to show support for your cause without reciprocating, but not in a tit-for-tat transactional kind of way, but in a genuine way. Really listening, investing yourself, showing up, and pushing beyond your comfort zone. People can tell when support is perfunctory and when it comes with strings attached and when it is genuine. Be a good person for its own merits, not because you're expecting something in exchange. Number 7, we can share recipes and free resources for helping people to get a foot in the door. Many people want to help create change or move in this direction, but they are overwhelmed and don't want to fail. Be an ambassador to help where you can without being conditional or pushy. We have a great, if I may say so myself, we have a great free resource on veganstreet.com called The Guide for New Vegans that is very helpful, in my opinion. Vegan Outreach and a few other organizations also have a way that you can become a mentor for new vegans. So, just do some Googling on that. Mentors are always needed. Number 8. We can do our best to not nitpick people who are trying, and we can remember that change can be challenging and incremental for most people. Really be the kind of vegan you would have wanted to meet when you were transitioning, someone who is helpful, supportive, able to listen, and not shame. This doesn't mean that we sell out the animals. This does mean that we make an effort to meet people where they're at, and it's kind of a dance. Number 9, we can avoid overselling veganism or making empty promises. This is something that Ginny Messina is going to be speaking on a little bit in her talk, I believe, later. Ginny, are you in here? I'm sorry. What's the title of your talk?
Designing an optimal product.
Right. And so Ginny, I think, is one of the most passionate voices about ethical veganism, but also not making up falsehoods about it, which is like, for example, that you live forever, or you never get sick, or you have flat abs, or any other things that people try to attach with veganism to sell it. I think that is a problem because when people don't achieve what they think they will through veganism, they drop it if you hook them with that. But secondly, it's an ethic, and we undermine and compromise that ethic when we make false claims about it. If we show the world that we are real, fallible, but honest people, and we emphasize the real benefits of veganism, we don't need to deceive people to motivate them. Veganism can stand on its own legs without exaggerated claims. Number 10, we can try to challenge ourselves where we hold limiting beliefs about others and hold our own feet to the fire to reduce our contribution to oppression. We must remember that being vegan does not mean that we're above reproach, none of us. It begins with us. Remember that we are all raised in this normalized status quo, and it takes some introspection and self-honesty for everyone to be able to root it out. So in short, the more we disrupt patriarchy and its corollaries, the closer we'll get to a better world. And finally, I'd just like to close. We'll have, I think, a little bit of time for questions and answers or conversation. I just wanted to close with this quote from historian and author Howard Zinn. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act and at least the possibility of sending the spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act, in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents. And to live now is and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is in itself a marvelous victory. So, thank you. Thank you. And I did want to say, if anyone had anything to say, you have any questions or anything like that, feel free, Hi, yes?
You mentioned something about getting a vegan mentor.
Yes.
How do you do that?
I believe, maybe somebody in this room knows better, I believe that Vegan Outreach, if you go on their website or just Google Vegan Outreach, Vegan Mentor, you can find it that way. I know that Vegan Outreach has done that in the past. And perhaps other organizations, if you just, do the Google thing. So I have not gone through the process myself, but I understand they assign people to you, or you are assigned to a mentor, and, just to guide you through. Yes. So. Oh, hi. Yes.
You had the rhetorical question.
Yes.
Of
my favorite.
of whether or not we think the practices in dairy and egg laying are feminist or not. My answer is hell no.
Right. Right.
Hi.
Hi.
You mentioned that capitalism was a root cause of animal cruelty and that it's sort of based on a patriarchal mentality. I was wondering if you had thoughts, other than working with a vegan lifestyle that's sort of inside of a capitalist system, if there's sort of an economics that would be more equitable and in line with a feminist mindset that you have thought about at all?
That's such a good question. I have to say, I don't come from an economist. I'm not an economist, that's the word. It didn't sound right. I don't come from an economics background. And what I would say is, I've thought a lot about what the world would look like if it didn't have the stamp of patriarchy and sort of the corollaries of patriarchy on it. I think that we can't know that now because we were all raised in that. I feel like we're working toward that. I really don't know, other than I believe that it would, this is just my own personal view, not based on any kind of research or anything like that, but that it would be much more in line with what Carol Adams calls the feminist ethic of care, which is compassion, empathy, I believe that under feminism we would not be using other animals, and I guess that, which is not to say that people who participate in animal agribusiness aren't necessarily feminist. They may believe that they are feminist, but I believe that animal agribusiness is distinctly not feminist. So, Right. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I struggle when I talk with someone who are feminists, but then when the arguments become like, but humans are not equal to animals. So I have to actually go with that because if we diverge on that statement, I cannot continue the conversation
Right.
with them. So I'm like, yes, you're right. They are not same. But then it also give this conversation a foundation for the argument of so the suffering of animal is not as bad
Right.
as suffering of human, or using exploiting animals is not as bad as doing it to human.
Sure.
I struggle getting over the argument from others when I try to have genuine conversation. And I know actually people who have the argument came a lot toward this side because they understand the human side, right?
Right.
The inequality in human society. Have you experienced such
Oh, yeah, sure,
struggle?
yeah.
And do you have any advice? And
Yeah.
I will benefit from it.
Yeah, thank you. That's just such a great question. I do, and I honestly have struggled for many years because I consider myself a feminist, and I feel very much like that respect is not reciprocated to vegans. I would say that because we are pro-human biased, that it's not logical to say that other animals' lives don't matter as much as our lives matter. So, like, I just don't. I respectfully disagree when people start out because when you can say that other animals are less important or that other animals matter less, you can really kind of justify anything. It becomes a slippery slope of justifications. So for myself, I simply don't accept that is a given, that other animals don't matter as much as we do. So in order to continue the conversation, I try to be friendly about that, but I do say, I think you're looking at things from a biased perspective. I mean, of course, this person is going to be. I mean, There's actually a really good book out about this topic. Is the problem with empathy? We think of empathy as being, synonymous with compassion, but empathy really just means that you understand how another like you feels. But it becomes a big problem when you can't connect with another's right because that person doesn't look like you, sound like you, come from your experience. So I try to reroute it back to, I actually don't agree with your core premise. So, were there any other questions or anything?
Yes.
Yes. Hi.
Hi. First, thank you for such an amazing talk. It was very touching in many parts.
Thank you.
My question was a little bit related to what another person asked before, and the relationship between patriarchy and capitalism. I've been trying to integrate all those concepts with the awareness that I have now as a vegan. But one of the things is I see, assuming that capitalism is a byproduct of patriarchy, and we have it in this society now, women achieving the power of, through working, compete against men in many ways, not in many ways because still struggling to achieve the equality in many areas. But when we see, I don't know if we need to blank corporations as mark them just as solely capitalist, since, for example, what happened last week with Colin Kaepernick,
Right.
where
Nike. And,
Nike
yeah,
got behind him. Probably it's not the best example of Nike is still a very oppressive company. In the process, people is getting benefit from this discussion happening.
Right,
And
right.
we may have the LGBT issues that we had that we still haven't achieved through equality, but because of corporations getting behind LGBT issues and pushing those things,
Right.
This intrinsic patriarchal system is having a way, in some way, is helping.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not saying it's good. I'm
Right.
saying this is what we have.
No, right.
So my question is, how do you think that corporations in the animal industry have a chance to do something like that and
Right.
do the change, or they can't just because they're based in
Right.
a patriarchal principle?
Right. No, it's such a good question and so timely with everything that you like mentioned specifically that happened last week. I think that a lot of people did a good job of saying, Nike, we really appreciate that you are on the right side of history with this, and you're standing behind this guy with this amazing message. Let's not forget that you've had major issues with sweatshops, and that you use kangaroo leather, and so I think that people in general, like social media is such a mixed bag. I think that people in general are doing a good job of sort of corporate accountability with certain things, but I do agree with you that like sometimes they have far more resources, far more bandwidth, than individual activists. Sometimes they can, do things to help push culture toward a better world, but at the same time, it can also become a slick marketing campaign. You know what I'm saying? So, like, I think that we can't look to them, to corporations or whatever, to sort of they're not a social justice movement. You know what I mean? So like, I think it's just like really like I was talking about before, it's kind of going to be this sort of dance between the public and these corporations and stuff. But like, yeah, I don't think all corporations are evil or anything like that. But I do think that the concept of capitalism flowed from patriarchy. But yeah, so I don't know if I answered your question, but I think we're living in interesting times. Let's just say that, where that there is that kind of accountability that Nike can then be asked, like, how are things going in terms of your human rights issues? You know what I mean? So, yeah. Any other questions or anything? I guess that's it. I just want to thank everyone so much for coming out here and for being part of this experience. This is the first time I ever gave this talk, so I was a little bit nervous, but anyway, I want to thank you all. We have a booth where we're giving out postcards for Vegan Mania. That's in the other room with the vendors. So if any of you want to stop by, feel free. And I hope to see some of you at Vegan Mania on October 13th. And anyway, thank you for coming out for this fantastic day. Thank you.